Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to our Lucasfilm Animation AfroAnimation presentation today. Today we're going to walk you through the life of a sequence. We'll go over design, assets, storyboards, animation, and lighting, and how all those departments need to link together to produce Star Wars: The Bad Batch. To take us through this process today, can you go to the next slide, please? We'll have myself, Alex Spotswood, producer, Andre Kirk, art director, Paul Zinnis, director of digital assets, Sterling Sheehy, senior storyboard artist, Justin Bruce Lee, associate storyboard artist, Keith Kellogg, animation director, and Joel Aaron, director of cinematography, lighting, and VFX. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Star Wars: The Bad Batch premiered May the 4th on D+. To get us started, we'd like to give you a taste of The Bad Batch is. So we'll be showing you our Season 1 trailer. Enjoy.
A test is in order. 5 enhanced clones, more capable than an army. Yet they exhibit a concerning level of disobedience and disregard for orders. Lord Elshigard, give me more! Our squad's nothing but trouble. But we get the job done.
You're Clone Force 99.
You know who we are.
Hunter,
Let's go.
Echo,
Hyperdrive's online.
Tick,
Prepping to jump.
Wrecker,
Let's blow something up. Yeah,
and Crosshair.
your move. We're all you need. I want Clone Force 99 found and wiped out.
The galaxy's a dangerous place to be.
We need to get out of here. What do you say, kid? You want to come with us?
How can I help?
The Clone Wars have ended. You can either adapt and survive, or die with the past. The decision is yours. We do what we do. Strap in, kid.
Awesome. As I said before, my name is Alex Spotswood. I am the producer on Star Wars: The Bad Batch. I started at Lucasfilm in 2009 as the Asset Department production assistant on Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Working at Lucas Animation has been the greatest education of my life, hands down. I started with very little experience in animation, but the people and the environment and culture here at Lucas Animation has led me to be the producer I am today. Moving on to the next slide. As I said, today we're going to walk you through the life of a sequence and how it passes through design, assets, storyboard, animation, and lighting, and how all those departments need to link together to produce the show. Before we start, we need to develop a pipeline and a schedule, and that's where production comes in. One of my jobs of producer is to connect the departments to one another. We are working on several episodes at any one time, and we have dozens of departments. We need to keep everyone working and make sure that they feed into one another on a reliable basis. Next slide, please. This is our master doc. How do we do this? We start pulling back and pulling way back. We look at a season as a whole and ask ourselves some questions. How many episodes are we going to produce? And when do they need to air? We work with our vendor and establish production lines for assets, layout, animation, and lighting. And within those departments, we also have sub-production lines for cloth and crowd, FX, and matte paintings. All individual pipelines on their own right. We also look at our internal staff and determine our headcount for our design, story, and editorial teams. We supplement our asset and FX team with some additional internal artists. We take all this information and lay out the departments on this master doc with blocks of color. Each block of color represents a department and a pipeline. Next slide, please. When we push in on this doc, you can see how the departments overlap with one another. We're looking at 4 episodes right here. If you look at the top middle, that blue bar is animation. And if you take your finger and draw a straight line down, you can see that we're reviewing the whip reel storyboards just 3 episodes later. As I said, this is just 4 episodes. If you look at the whole session, the amount of overlap in coordination and planning is staggering. So what do? We play Tetris. We run through scenario after scenario after scenario. Version control on your spreadsheets is extremely important. We review those scenarios with our leads, we review with the vendor, and then we run more scenarios. Once we lock down our overall master schedule, we can move on to milestones. Next slide, please. Milestones is where we start to move in closer, more detailed, more granular. As I mentioned, each block of color in the master schedule is a production pipeline. And within that production pipeline, there are several milestones. Kickoffs, reviews, deliveries, not to mention our dailies and internal follow-ups. There are approximately 100 milestones for every episode. And this document doesn't even include our script milestones or our post-production milestones. Milestones are how we track the progress of our episodes. It is our first tool to catch slowdowns or bottlenecks anywhere in our production pipeline. Milestone dates are tracked in the doc, and when you complete the milestone, you get to purple out that day. The goal is to purple your milestones. Slowly but surely, from left to right, more and more milestones get purpled. Once everything is plotted out on our milestones and then our main schedule, then all production needs to do is to keep and maintain this schedule. Production issues will arise, but with solid pipeline and scheduling, you and your team can figure out anything. So as you can see, spreadsheets are my kind of art, but now I'm going to hand it off to the real artist, our art director, Andre Kirk.
Andre, we're not hearing you.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not hearing Andre.
And he has such a beautiful voice, too.
Maybe for the time being, while Andre works on his audio, we could jump to Paul.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Andre, I hope you get your mic working. I am Paul Zinnes. I am the digital asset director here at Lucasfilm Animation. I've been working here for I think the past 15 years. I started on the Clone Wars, and I continued through with Rebels, Resistance, and now the Bad Batch. I've been in the industry for over 25 years, getting my start in video games at LucasArts, Double Fine Productions, and in visual effects at Tippett Studio. My role and that of the asset team is to transform the concept art created by Andre and his team of designers into fully functional 3D assets that you see on the screen, including characters, props, and vehicles, and environments. And you can go on to the next slide. With the sequence that we're looking at today, each department in the pipeline has unique challenges. And as you will hear, Andre and his team, they have to work hard to come up with designs that are unique and creative and functional, yet still fit within the Star Wars universe. And I won't speak for the rest of the presenters that you're going to hear from today, but we all face challenges, and Assets is no different. And the first challenge that we face is, how do we build all the assets that are in each episode? And that is a really, really big challenge. And you don't really think about it as a viewer, right? But we face a constant balancing act between how many assets we can build against the very limited time and resources that we have available. So if you go back to Alex's schedule, and all those boxes that he was referring to, one of those boxes was the asset build for the episode, and it represents a finite number of days on that schedule. And in that box, there's a fixed number of artists. So days times artists will be our capacity and man days for the asset build. So if you consider the sequence that we're discussing here today, if we can go to the slide that had the characters, we have 9 characters that we need to have ready just for this sequence. All right, so from screen left to screen right, we have Omega wet hair, Omega with backpack. We have a conscription trooper in the background. We have Hunter sort of in the middle, and there's a fish floating above his shoulder. We have Crosshair Trooper and variants of Tech and Echo. And in front, of course, we have our favorite medical droid, AZI-3. A character takes about 40 man days to build, and that includes your proxy, your model, your texture, and your rig. And we have enough capacity to build about 5 new characters for an episode. So in this case, hopefully at least 4 of these characters would already exist from a previous episode. If you can go to the next slide. Here are some sets that are used in this sequence. And you can see they vary greatly in scale and complexity. We have Camino to Poca City on the left. We have the underwater Camino tunnel complex on the right. We have various corridors and rooms just above that. And again, this is just for this sequence. So you can get an idea of the problem we face in making sure we can fit everything we need to build for the episode in that box on Alex's schedule. So how do we do this? Suppose we, in that box, we have 100 man days to build assets for an episode. And then imagine we get the script for an upcoming episode and our estimate is maybe 200 man days to build everything. And that's not that uncommon. It does happen. So when we see this, we need to sit down with Andre and Brad Rao, who's our supervising director, to assess the situation and then propose ideas on how to reduce the asset build to fit within that box. What can we reuse from our existing asset library? Can we substitute an asset? Can we just do a texture variant instead of building new geometry and a new rig? And then as a last resort, Brad's superpower as a supervising director is that he has the ability to change the script to help reduce the number of assets. That's super helpful. We totally appreciate it, but it is very much a last resort because we never want to tell the director that he can't have assets basically for the episode. All right, so our next step is we turn our focus to what's going to be the stage area for the action. So when we get the design might show like this large environment or a vast landscape. But in story, we may only need to be on a small part of that set. So we need to know this before we go into the asset build, because then we can focus our efforts on building just that small part of the set and then rely on mats and projections for the visual extension. All right, then once we've minimized the number of assets, and if we can hold on that corridor just for a second, once we've minimized the stage areas within the assets, we can then focus on breaking down complex designs into a small number of reusable components, or what you might call like Lego pieces. And this allows us to build what looks like a large complex set, but in reality, it's just composed of a small number of unique elements. So for example, let's say we have to do a forest, and we have to do forests every now and then for our shows. And you get a design for a forest and you see like 1,000 trees. Of course, you don't need to build 1,000 unique trees. You build 3 or 4 trees, and then you duplicate those trees throughout the set. And then through the camera's view, no one's going to notice that we only built 3 or 4 trees. Now that's sort of an extreme example, but you can see that principle in the sets for this sequence. So while they may look complex, they're only built from a limited number of unique elements. So for example, hallways like this, it's a great example. For a typical hallway build, we build 4 unique components. We build a straight piece, an intersection, a T-joint, and a 90-degree turn. And in this particular case, we actually only built 3 components. We didn't build a 90-degree turn. But once we have those Lego pieces, then we can then snap them together to create as much set as the director needs. If we go to the next slide, cities, and these are sort of like cities. Cities are similar. For a city, we might just build like 5 buildings and some set dressing. And then we quickly go to a projection or a map painting. And then that allows us to focus on, I'm sorry, can we go one more slide? So this is something sort of like a city. Here we go. That is actually just made up of a small number of unique components. We've got basically a tube, we've got the support column, and we have that large sort of structure in the center. If we go to the next slide, you can see what turns out to be the stage area for the action. You can see the trooper there. And that's basically where we focus our efforts. And then if we go to the next slide, you can see Tapoka City, which is basically 3 buildings and some support columns. That's about it. So we try to build as much, or we try to build as little as possible and reuse as much as possible. All right, the second major challenge for the asset department is that basically we are in somewhat of a unique position in the pipeline where almost every other department, from design through story, through animation, through lighting, is basically a customer of the asset department. The design department is our customer. Do the assets we build match the spirit and aesthetic of the design? The story team is our customer because the assets we make, they have to perform as needed so they can tell the story. Same thing with animation and same thing with lighting. And our goal is to make sure our customers are happy. And no department or no person works in isolation on this team. We're all part of a much larger team. And as an artist, maybe you have just modeled the most amazing new character with complex clothing, unique anatomy. Maybe you're in ZBrush, you got like highly detailed facial features. That's all great, but it's not going to be worth too much if it can't be animated or it can't be lit or it doesn't match the design. So that is something to think about when you're building your portfolio, because we will for sure ask about that. And then one piece of advice I remember from my days at Tippett was given to me by my lead. And he said, Paul, keep your painters happy. And by that, he meant I needed to take into consideration how my work would affect the people further down the pipe, and that I needed to make sure what I created reflected the workflow and needs of others. And that is something we all take into consideration when we look for new hires. Not only are we asking, is this applicant a talented superstar, but equally important is, will they work well with this team? And I think I am out of time. I think we're going to try to go back to Andre. Andre, are you good? Andre, I think we still can't hear you. All right.
Yeah.
So I think we need to move on to Sterling Sheehy, who will give us his view into the storyboard process at Lucasfilm Animation, and hopefully we will come back to Andre. Sterling, all yours.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Sterling Sheehy, and I'm a senior storyboard artist at Lucasfilm. I've been storyboarding Star Wars now for over 9 years, and I work under our supervising director, Brad Rao, and I storyboard for all 3 of our episodic directors, and I'm also responsible for all the post revisions, so all the storyboard post revisions that are needed later in the production. And there are always a lot of storyboard revisions. And I'm very fortunate because I get to see the evolution of nearly every episode from script to screen. And that gives me like this really nice overview of what's going on story-wise in the show. So as Alex and others showed earlier, the secret to our success at Lucasfilm is modularization, teamwork, and communication. Oh, first slide, please. First, thank you. And we like to apply all those principles to our story work as well. So we start with a script and the assets provided to us by Paul and Andre's team. And it's our goal to transform them into a visual framework for all the other departments. Now, this is one of the main reasons we storyboard in 3D. It allows us to communicate more clearly and efficiently to all the other departments. The directors break down the script into sequences and hand those off to individual story artists who break those down further into scenes and shots. And then we take all those shots and pass them along to the editorial department, which puts it back together in an animated story reel. Next slide, please. And the story reel is used as reference for the production of the show. It's our primary goal as a department to create visually captivating, great stories. But our secondary goal is to lay a solid foundation for all the other departments to build upon. And this is where working in 3D really helps. It's an incredible communication tool. So For example, here is a short sequence in which the Bad Batch arrive at a secret underwater lab. Now, on the surface, this is a pretty straightforward sequence. And as a storyboard artist, I need to communicate all the important story points from the script. But where this gets a little more complicated is when I have to address all of the real world constraints of our production. So as a story artist, what I'm really concerned with here is character counts, anticipating future dialogue revisions. I'm concerned about reflections on the glass and setting up an action sequence, which I know is going to take place later in the episode. Now, Andre's team did a really lovely job designing these glass containers, and I need to make sure that the audience knows how they work because it's important for later in the show. But I also need to anticipate lighting and the effects department's needs, and how is it going to be rendered? There are a lot of tricks that I do to simplify a sequence like this. First and most importantly, I ask a lot of questions and identify all the major story and technical points that need to get addressed. Then I set up very clear establishing shots and well-defined lines of action that support both of these needs. And this will clarify the story beats for the audience, which is the most important thing. But it will also simplify the setups for the production team. And when I simplify my camera setups, that will also help layout and effects. The real world benefits of me simplifying a scene is that it gives the production team more time to focus on the things that matter, like artistry and performance. And we're all artists and we all want to do our best. So it's our job as the story department to set people up to do their best. And the story reel is used as production, it's like the blueprint for the show. And it's in a constant state of flux. And it's heavily debated over and worked on until Alex's all-important schedule says pencils down, and then we all jump to a new episode. A strong understanding of traditional storyboarding is fundamental to this job. But knowing how those choices affect other departments is arguably the most important aspect of the work. Every episode is like a visual puzzle, and myself and everyone on the story team, we're always trying to solve it for the least number of moves possible. Now, to talk a little bit more about how we create those puzzle pieces, here is one of our associate storyboard artists, the very talented Justin Bruce Lee.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Sterling. Well, yeah, just to say again, I am Justin Bruce Lee, and I'm an associate story artist for Lucasfilm Animation, working under the director Nate Villanueva and supervising director Brad Rao. And I just want to with my slides, I'm going to break down our process and show our day-to-day of a Lucasfilm story artist and elaborate what basically Sterling just said with our story process. So if we go to the next slide. Yeah, so see, this is where we first get the script. This is where we can analyze the story, break down our scenes, and ask as many questions as we can so we're on the same page. Like, for example, what's the screen direction in my scene? What's the motivation of the characters? Will this work with the set that Paul and Andre built? Should we do this? Should we do that? Etc. We just want to collaborate with our directors and supervisors so we won't affect everyone in the long run when we are further down the process. Next slide. So after we get our script, right, we start writing our beat list. And our beat list is a list in order of all the story beats, camera shots, and actions that we want to execute for our scene. So it's really good to learn live action terminology like close-ups, medium close-ups, establishing shots, insert shots, etc. We just want to be as detailed as possible in our description and be well planned so it'll be easier to pitch our ideas to our directors on how we envision the scene, because in Star Wars, we have to think as live action filmmakers. This step of the process is also the only time we can draw. So in the script, you see we could draw out thumbnails to convey our ideas better to the director. Next slide. Thank you. Well, okay, I know you're all wondering after everything, what? No drawing? Why do I want to do this as a 2D storyboard artist? But like what Sterling said, what we do in Lucasfilm is 3D storyboards, like a previs kind of work where we're using Lucasfilm's proprietary software called Zivus. Working in 3D will again, will give the most accurate representation that will translate best efficiently into the final product, because later in the pipeline, Keith with animation and Joel with lighting effects, they can use our work files also for the process. You can see we can navigate through the 3D set and be able to animate the 3D characters that Paul and Andre's team were able to build. You can also place 3D cameras to record your shots and have the option to animate them if you want any kind of camera movement. It's really easy to go back and forth, because where you can see right here, there's also an editing function, and you can see how the whole scene is working well together. We're seriously like our own live action directors filming on a set with our digital actors. It's really seriously for me like playing with action figures, and it's like a child's dream come true. Next slide. Well, this is a little sequence I did when I first started out, when I came in for season 1, episode 15 for Bad Batch. So if you learn or practice in 3D animation, it will give you a head start in Xevis, but anyone can learn and eventually be comfortable with the tool. So just never be intimidated if you're a 2D storyboard artist, because this is more user-friendly than like Maya or any other software. So anyone from a good 2D storyboard background can learn, because having a 2D storyboard background is still very important for our line of work in Lucasfilm Animation, because 2D taught us composition, character acting, how to animate, and how to tell a story. So no medium could get in the way of anyone being a storyteller. So just like start experimenting with 2D and 3D, because you never know what kind of storyboards you're going to produce in the future. So like when I'm in college, I always give my 110% in all my classes, 2D and 3D. And look, you might be working in Star Wars doing this kind of stuff. So it's like a dream come true. So now I'm going to hand it off to our amazing animation director who brings our characters to life. Keith?
I think we're gonna try
yeah.
Andre
To our
one more
amazing
time. No
art
worries,
director.
Justin.
Andre, yes.
Oh shoot, Andre. Sorry.
Oh, no.
All right, then we will go on to our wonderful animation. Kellogg.
Andre, we'll get it. We'll get it. As
We'll
Alex
just lip sync it. Just someone else talk for him.
As Alex said, my name is Keith Kellogg. I'm the animation director here at Lucasfilm Animation. I've been in the industry now, coming on, oh God, close to 25 years, which makes me sound really old. But I've been, the last 13 years has been here with this amazing crew here, basically developing any kind of Star Wars story you can think of. So next slide. So my job begins after both Andre, doing amazing designs with his team, and Paul creating these great assets with our team over at CGCG. Here you'll see basically we get our high-res characters, and this is Hunter. We put every character through a calisthenic, as you can see. Have them, move their arms, do all the usual kind of things that you think you try and do to make sure that the character can perform the way that we need it to. There's about 260 controls on Hunter to get different poses and make sure all our armor's out of the way as we're working with him. So we'll go back and forth trying to make sure everything's clean and that we can get Hunter into all the different kind of poses that are necessary. Next slide. So what I thought I'd take you guys through is sort of a very simple scene, basically just one shot where it's just a couple characters walking. So when we start, each character, I like to personally try and put a little bit of their attitude and who they are into their walk cycle. So here you'll see Hunter. For Hunter, he's very much the leader of the group. So we have a little bit of like that bravado and kind of swagger in him, where he's kind of walking chest out. He's got a little bit of movement to the hips, trying to just kind of get that idea that like the second you see him, this guy's a leader. So that's what we try and do with each individual character, kind of put a trait in there. So next slide. So here we'll have Crosshair, one of our other characters on the Bad Batch. Crosshair is sort of our sniper character. So we made him a little bit quicker, and he's also got a little more sort of reserved kind of nature about him as he's walking. So if you were to watch them both side by side, you could really just see, you know, totally what the difference is between the two characters just by visually looking at them as they walk forward. So next slide. So this is our process where we go from the amazing storyboards that you saw from both Justin and Sterling up on screen left there. And then we send that overseas to our amazing partner, CGCG in Taiwan, who without their, you know, input and help and working on this show, we really could not do what we do. So they'll get this file and we'll set up the layout. And layout, you can see on the screen right side, is basically where we'll take all the high-res assets and we'll finally put them into the shot with the high-res camera, high-res sets that have all been created by our asset department, and really get a feel for what sort of, you know, the shot's really going to look like. Myself, Joel, Aaron, who you'll hear from in a minute, and the director will all sit down and we'll have layout dailies and we'll go through and basically give notes to make sure that we're really getting the essence of what we had in the storyboards all the way up through the high res. On the bottom is where you can see the actual finished animation. So what I wanted to show here is the body mechanics. So every shot, you know, we really spend a lot of time on taking, you know, the idea of trying to get Hunter here looking around. So we had to really make sure he comes to life with the way he's walking with Crosshair, and then also just sort of keeping that kind of looking around idea to try and make sure that it comes across that he doesn't quite know where he is. He's trying to figure things out. You can also see in animation, we kind of changed the composition just a little bit. So we had them continue to walk forward. So they start out smaller in screen and then get a little bigger as you finish. So that was something that just kind of gives the idea that they're moving, you know, toward us and through the actual set a little bit better. Next slide. So after the body mechanics are done, you know, then we go into the face. So we have 60 face controls on Hunter that will be able to dial in any kind of different expression or any kind of, you know, eye blinks, brow raises, whatever, to try and really make him emote and come across the way that you guys see him eventually in the show. So next slide. So with those different controls, we will create a facial expression sheet for each character, basically. And what this does is give the overseas animation team a idea to try and how we stay on model. So make sure that, you know, when Hunter's happy, he's this, and he's really never happy, honestly. So happy is it's kind of funny because you look at Hunter and you never see him like that. But in here, you can see happy, sad, confused, angry, you know, all these different expressions. And basically, this gives the idea for our animators as a starting point. We can dial these in as like a blocking pass to try and get an idea of like, okay, this is how, you know, he would be in this particular, he's more upset. So we'll dial in that. And then we'll add on top of that a change in expression. And then we'll have to go in and really finesse it after that. So I'll show you a quick sort of example of that first shot, but an up close version. If we could play it with sound first, that'd be great.
Roll the rigs. When did you start caring about them? No Cam and Owens either. This facility's being decommissioned. You don't seem too concerned. Why would I be?
So sorry for how choppy that is. I know it's kind of hard to see the subtle nuances and things that we try and put in there. But the idea basically here with the facial animation is to take all those controls and really make Hunter come to life. Like, we have to make sure all the decisions are made, talking about it. I've already had a kickoff, for instance, with my team, where we go over every episode for it's like about a 3-hour long kickoff. And we go over all the acting beats and what we need to see out of each character. And I'll do a bunch of video reference. I usually end up acting out about a third of each episode. So trying to give the overseas team a real good starting point for where we're at. And then eventually we'll take all those controls and try and create this emotional, basically, kind of performance that you guys see and hopefully I'll react to. And then, like I said, that's just one simple shot where it's just them walking down the hallway. We do that for about 400 shots in every episode. And as Alex was saying, we're working on 3+ episodes at a time. So you can imagine how fast we have to be going and how quick everything is. So once we are done with our part, then I will hand it over to my partner in crime for the last 13+ years, Mr. Joel Aaron, and his amazing effects wizardry.
I think we're going to try Andre one more time.
Oh, God, we're going to try Andre again. Let's try Andre one more time. Come on, Andre.
Come on, Andre. Oh, now unmute on the.
It still says you're muted here. Weird. Okay. Well, I guess I will hand it off to.
Sorry, Andre.
And we'll have an Andre Kirk summit.
Andre by himself at some point.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, well, thank you, Keith. Sorry, this is my introduction. My name is Joel Aaron. I've been with the company for a little over 30 years. I started at Industrial Light and Magic in 91, I think, working on the movie Hook. So I've been around and done quite a few feature films before moving over to Lucasfilm Animation in 2007, 2008, right around there. And it was a good fit for me because I came from a background of trying to make everything photoreal, but I have a painter and photography background. I also don't have a very big education on this. I didn't go to a big school after this. I went to a continuation high school. I only did a couple years of college, but I was so obsessed with all this stuff, I just started learning it on my own, buying my own computer right when they came out and just trying to learn everything I could to get in the door, and got into ILM, and I just learned from everything. I listened to everyone and learned what I could from all the greats. And I've kind of carried that through into how we do a lot of the show for the lighting and the effects, to keep it a little more simple and to focus mostly on the storytelling of what we're doing. And so we're not trying to make big fanfare with beautiful lights and visual effects and make it too hard to do. At the end of the day, I'm always saying that we're not writing a SIGGRAPH paper, we're making Star Wars. And to me, that's way more important. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm just going to kind of run through this. I'll be brief so we can try Andre again here. But what I'm going to do real quick is kind of talk you through my process of how we go from the story to concept to final lighting. And what happens is, from the very beginning, from the script, I started having conversations with Brad Rao, with Andre, with the rest of the team. And so we start to think about what we want this set to look like. At that point, we have the conversations with the story team and the directors of what's possible, what's not possible, because lighting and effects is the very end of the pipeline. So we're at the pressure cooker point. So we got to make sure that everything getting in looks right. And so in order to do that, we have a lot of communication going back and forth with our team, and something we pride ourselves on a great deal. We're kind of like this family that just can communicate, and every day is like a Thanksgiving dinner for us. And so what we'll do is we'll take a single frame from the story reel and we'll create a lighting concept. And those lighting concepts are painted by Molly Denmark. And she will usually paint around 15, sometimes 20 lighting concepts that represent the episode. And you can see here on the very bottom, that image, that's the final lighting shot. And on the top right is the lighting concept. On the left, you can see the story element. Let's go to the next slide real quick. So the lighting concepts that Molly does usually will help us drive the color palette for the episode, the target. So we will try not to put a lot of details into these lighting concepts. It's one of my favorite phases of the production here because we can kind of see it coming to life. And a lot of the times the story team and the directors are so detached from this process. It's extremely rewarding to like show, you know, Justin and Sterling like what these concepts look like of their work that they put together. It's this beautiful cinematic collaboration that we've got. And so the lighting concepts also help us drive a little bit of what needs to be created that the asset didn't fill. So like Paul was saying, you need to build what it is we're going to shoot. And oftentimes we'll have shots that are pretty wide where we'll need to go in and create additional elements. Or in the case of effects, we'll have to create the ocean to put it in there. And so there's this weaving that we do throughout the whole process that comes together right at this lighting concept phase. And to give you an idea, Molly paints these pretty fast. She'll go in and do a quick render in Maya, usually just simple shading. If we have textures, we'll do the textures, and then she'll try and get general lighting there and then just paint on top of it. Back in Clone Wars, what we used to do was we'd just paint straight up. And that's what Chris Voy and Anthony Ermio would do, is just paint raw. And that's why if you look at early Clone Wars lighting concepts, they're a little bit more abstract. They're closer to like the McQuarrie style, whereas here we need to get as much information to our overseas team as possible. So that's lighting. But I'm going to talk a little bit about painting. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that I work a lot with on the team is the lighting team is to make sure that we're not just lighting a scene in CG. We're not letting the lights on the set drive what it is that we're lighting. And so I'll pull together tons of reference, and I will put reference together in an episode in order of the episode. So I will find shots from movies. I will do a paint over in Photoshop to show them what it should look like. And then when we do kick off the episode, similar to how Keith would have, the time with the team to go over everything, we do the same as well. So we'll go through every shot or setup, and we'll do paint overs and make sure everyone is clear on what we're doing. But the key to it all is understanding fine art painting, because from day one with the team, I was always talking about a Rembrandt triangle, that little triangle of light that appears on the shadow side of a character's face when painted, the chiaroscuro of light coming in a window and creating your light and shadow. So that's in every single shot. We really look at every shot like a painting. Every time it comes up in dailies, usually in the morning, I'll sit and I'll look at it as a still. And I'll think, as being a photographer, what would I do? What would I do if I was on set here? What would I do if I was shooting this? And we shape from there. We also have the added joy of, when we're all done with everything, going into post and doing everything in color correct. So on top of that, and I can go in more in questions and answers later about the type of painters that we follow and try and aim towards. It's always Rembrandt or Caravaggio or Vermeer quite a bit. I do love Sargent, American painter. John Singer Sargent's probably one of my favorites. Let's go to the next real quick. Next slide. I want to make sure Andre has time to hold up cue cards for his thing. So with visual effects, this is where it gets a little crazy. And this is more of my wheelhouse where I came from at ILM, because I was a lighter visual effects artist. I was a generalist. I was doing everything. Back in the day, we did everything. We animated, lit, rotoed, did it all. And so with that knowledge, I can go into these effects annotations and I will write down descriptions of not just what it is needs to happen in that shot, but what you need to feel while looking at it and what you need to hear in your head. One of the biggest things that helps a visual effects artist is playing the sound in your head or out loud. And I'll do that all the time. If I'm in a kickoff or if I'm reviewing stuff, I'm making sounds out loud. When I go overseas and work with the team, I'm making sure we're all making sounds while watching effects on what it would sound like. It's really important to do that because visual effects work is kind of like a silent filmmaking. You need to imagine that in your head. And so there's a lot of communication that goes here. And what you're missing on the right side here is of that spreadsheet is a bunch of reference images that we'll have. So let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to play this clip without audio, and you'll see how it all comes together. Everything that we've just talked about, and when you see Andre's presentation, it will kind of put the cherry on top of everything. That we had to make it feel as big and grand and detailed as those designs. And so a lot goes into these final images that you're seeing. There's a lot of post work that's been done, some camera shake. All the effects I usually try and play in camera. So when it's raining or stormy, stuff is happening in camera. You don't need all that 3D depth. If you break down visual effects and try and show it in all 3D, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to kill your computer. It's going to take you way too long to get it done. You look at all these shots right now of the Bad Batch getting off the ship. The rain is only in the camera. Everything is between the camera and the characters. If I need depth, it goes back behind the characters. If I need rain on the surface, I just emit tiny little things that look like torn paper cups all over the characters, and it looks like rain is hitting the surface. So with lighting, it's very important also to tell a story. And with this, with this episode and the following episode, we really wanted to go from as dark as possible to as light as possible. I'm doing the same thing right now, working through season 2, of making sure that we have a light theme that goes throughout it. So here was really important to kind of go all the way from darkness into here, where it's Omega that turns on the lights. And from here, the rest of the episode plays out, where we're in Omega's lighting environment until all the lights go out, if you watch the episode. So here you can even see the set that was shown earlier. We'll do matte painting, support in the back. There's the fish Paul showed you, which is pretty cool. And that's the whole clip. With that, I think that's pretty fast. I went over everything. Would we go back to Andre again? I haven't been following the chats. Yes?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
We're trying to.
He's talking to us from the moon.
I'm talking to you all through Sterling via phone. So hopefully you can hear me. It is a pity that these technical difficulties have made me remove the song portion of my presentation, but I will go ahead with just the information. Hi everyone, my name is Andre Kirk. I'm an art director at Lucasfilm Animation. After working for many years in games and animation, I started working as a concept artist on Star Wars The Clone Wars in 2010 at Lucasfilm Animation, and have continued to work on our various shows ever since. In the design department, our responsibility is to translate written or verbal information into visual imagery that can be translated into assets to be used in our shows. The design aspect of the work begins with the script. Every item in a given script needs to be built, reused, or modified. The design department is responsible for breaking down all the items mentioned in a script into different categories, sorting through them and analyzing what needs to be created for an upcoming episode. Through meetings with the supervising director and the assets, lighting, effects, and animation departments, we come up with a list of tasks that we assign out to the individual designers on our team. In kicking off the tasks to the design team, we try and answer as many questions as possible prior to design starting on that episode. Each designer will then approach their task as a portion of a larger objective, that being the final episode. The sequence we're discussing today had quite a few complicated design issues to deal with. Coming up with a believable underwater transit system to transport our heroes from one location to another was only one of the many challenges. In designing the system, we also needed to account for how it would be used in any subsequent episode and ensure that it could also fulfill those story needs. It's important for a designer to immerse themselves in the task they're creating and approach their designs from an in-world perspective. Where am I going? How do I get there? How do I open a door? Where's the light? Is there a light? Questions like that. While some of these questions may seem obvious and easy to answer in your day-to-day life, they need to be approached differently for a galaxy far away. And when you're trying to create a particular mood or augment a moment in the script, these will be taken into account. Creating a path for a character to move along in an episode crosses over many individual design assignments. Communication within the department is vital in making sure that all these various elements connect assets successfully, not only visually, but from an engineering perspective too. This information that needs to be communicated to our outside partner studios in order to be created as 3D assets. In order to reduce any confusion resulting from back and forth communication, we need to be as explicit as possible in providing blueprints for how these assets should be built. How big are they? How do they relate to each other? And what goes where? The design department utilizes 3D in creating their designs to make sure that the scale of everything is universal. While everyone on our design team has varying degrees of proficiency in 3D, at the very basic level, it's utilized to maintain consistency at scale for assets across the show. If we go to the next slide, while we use 3D for our environment, sets, props, and vehicles, our characters are created in 2D and include orthographic terms. What may seem easy in the real world is often quite challenging in CG. Whenever a character changes their appearance, we need to consider how that will affect the character, not only from a design sense, but also how it will affect all the other departments involved in producing the show. In this example of Omega's hairstyle change, we have to take into consideration that while it may look easy in 2D, it will have larger ramifications for how her hair will perform in subsequent episodes. And we need to consult with the animation department on any possible issues. Another large part of the design department's responsibility is to help ensure that the intent of the design is communicated and translated into a 3D assets by means of constant communication with the assets department. And if this had all gone smoothly, I would have then handed off to Paul Zinnes, our digital director of digital assets, but instead I'll hand off back to Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. So now hopefully we'll do some questions and answers. The first question that I have up is for Sterling, actually. So is previs part of storyboarding?
Is previs part of storyboarding? I would say the most important thing is the story, and it doesn't really matter to me what medium we create it in. So I'd say what we do is very, very, very similar to previs, but we're doing story work. It just happens to be in 3D. So yeah, similar, but we're story focused. So
Thanks, Sterling. Next question. This one's going to be for Joel. We would love to learn various types of tools you use in each phase of the pipeline.
Sure. It's interesting. We don't really have like a proprietary pipeline for our tools. Everything is based around Maya and what we can do with it. You know, we do have the added, luxury of using the Maya that ILM uses, but we don't use all the bells and whistles from it. We will use Photoshop for a lot of the painting work. That goes even down to the textures. Like Paul would be able to answer more of that because they do use a little bit of Mudbox. They might use Substance Painter to do stuff. For all the visual effects, we really use, and for lighting, we use what's available to us. And we try and keep it simple. That's what's real important, is because whatever we do, we have to work with our overseas team and we have to move quick. If you looked at Alex's schedule, we're really tight. So we don't want the artists, keyword here, artists, to have to be technicians. We want them to move as fast as possible through this so they can craft the work. So the work looks more crafted than overly technical. But, Houdini, we'll use Houdini for some effects. Primarily, though, everything's in Maya. We really try and use Maya for everything. We use Arnold for our renderer. And we're using Eddie in Nuke. We use Nuke for compositing. No special bells and whistles there. We just shove it all in and comp it all out. We use Resolve for post. Anybody?
Thanks,
Download
Joel.
for free.
Another question I have, I think this one also be for Sterling. I'm curious at what point editorial and the directors get involved in the storyboarding, and is this kind of emotional animation?
It always starts with Brad, our supervising director, and he usually has a he pitches us his vision for the script, and then the directors also work with him, and there's a lot of meetings, and we talk about story. And we move in, we storyboard at first pass. So we essentially have a story launch, and then we all break off into our little sequences, and we try and generate all our shots and get them into editorial. And that's usually when editorial first sees it. And we try to keep editorial doesn't like to really see the first pass on the storyboards because they want fresh eyes, and we want fresh eyes as story artists. We've all been looking at the same material for, like 3-4 weeks, and it's really nice to have someone new come on and who's also seen it from a story perspective, give you fresh notes. And from that point, then we kind of go back and doing revisions, and we really begin to work it out. And that process really continues until Alex tells us to stop. So it's really fun. It's that collaboration, which I think is really the strength of our show, is that we have a lot of people checking our work, and it's really wonderful. So it's a team effort for sure.
Thanks, Sterling. This one's going to be kind of a group question. Do you find any portion of the pipeline takes longer than the rest, where a bubble of work can form and inundate others later on? Maybe Paul, any ideas at the front of the pipeline that you see?
I don't know. I mean, it's like we're always concerned about getting the proxy assets to the story team. And I think that might be one area where, because the proxy work is the first thing that we do after we get the designs, but we haven't really had much input for story. So we need to sort of prepare the proxy assets to a certain state. And then we review it with the director and with the story team. And oftentimes, they will then have ideas about how they want to use the assets. And then they'll request like updates or changes or modifications. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a bubble there because we don't, have that much time after we finish the proxies to then modify them for story. So sometimes, we'll get all these modification requests, and then the story will ask, when can we get them? And we're like, as soon as we can, just give us a few days. So I think for us, that's probably the main area where we might have a bubble.
Yeah. It's like a moon launch. We need to make sure everything is right before it goes up into space. And so there's a lot of that pressure and the details that need to go into making sure it's all right, so that when it gets to Keith, when it gets to me, and gets to the end, that we don't have to go back to the beginning to do anything.
Yeah, it's like a high school stage production. It's always a little crazy, but it always works out.
So it's a moonshot high school stage production.
Yeah, let's go with that.
And in the end, we have Star Wars. So it works out great.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, I think we're out of time, so I thank you all so much for your for showing up and listening to us run through what it takes to make a sequence of Star Wars: The Bad Batch. We're going to try and talk to the AfroAnimation team and see if we can get this video to you guys some way that you guys can access this later. But yeah, thank you so much, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for coming.